Okay, let's do this. So we're in the review. I should probably change what these are called. But we're in the you all vote on the topics week. So let's check the votes. Hopefully they didn't change because I have this one prepared. Showcasing the external libraries that do what we did on the homework. So there's a pretty clear top 3 winners. So each day will be one of these top 3, unless there's some really wild change in the votes. So external libraries, which I took to mean web frameworks. So I'll showcase 2 different web frameworks. What I did was dig up 2 of my older projects, which apparently libraries that have been updated have broken my code, so I can't really run them. But took 2 projects that I had, I dug them up, and each one of them uses a framework. I said last time that I'd probably use Flask. I have a very small Flask example I can show that too, but I plan on doing Express and Tornado. Tornado is actually really awesome. You should all use it, but that's what I'll showcase. And then the other 2, DDoS attack, which I'm excited about because I never really looked into DDoS attack. I know what it is. I could explain what a DDoS attack is, but that would take 5 minutes. So I have to expand my knowledge so I can fill up a 50-minute presentation, hopefully get some demos and everything where I can actually take down one of my sites. We'll see how that goes. I don't know how the prep's going to go with that, so we'll get something. We'll get something interesting. Then if it goes well, I can add that to the course. I can just be part of the course later on, future semesters. And then the other one, how to hack a government database. Sadly, number 4. I was excited to really break some things. But hosting a Minecraft Bedrock dedicated server inside a Docker container should be pretty interesting. And I don't think anything else has been getting traction. Jackie, I have to yell at Jackie. What the hell? On 116 and 312, he was making suggestions, which he's a TA, of course. But if he showed up to lecture and came to lecture as a TA, I wouldn't even care. I'd be like, oh yeah, he wants to see that stuff. But he's not even going to come to the lecture. He's got to stop making suggestions. And it's not even letting me. I've been trying to delete his, and I can't even do it. But those are the 3. That's what will look like what we'll do this week. So let's start with the showcase of things. I thought that was going to take me longer to go through these. Actually, it only took 3 minutes. So I got to hang out for a little bit here. Nobody has questions? Anyway, those look like the clear winners. I don't think there's going to be, historically speaking, so I do this with every class. I've been doing this for several years in every class that I teach. And usually the first day, there's all kinds of votes, and then things settle down and nothing changes. There's no surprises after that. Whatever the winners are after that first day, that's how it stays. So maybe that'll be different. I'll keep checking to make sure. But those are the 3 lectures I'll start planning on doing. All right, I'm not going to wait around forever. I was going to give another minute, but whatever. It'll still be up by 4:05. All right, so let's go through these two servers, and I think I want to start with Express. It's probably the one that's freshest in my memory. So these are, like I said, old projects that I dug up, and both of these projects, just incidentally, are projects that I worked on before I started using Docker, so neither of these projects even use Docker. It was weird going back to these projects and being like, man, I can't remember a day when I wasn't using those. So this site is, I was building one site for all of my course websites. I was using these in these semesters, 442 in the summer, 312, spring 19. Man, I've been doing, that must have been the first 312. I didn't know 312 was around that long. Spring 18, you can see kind of what courses I was teaching. 442 and 115, and then 312 came along. And then my 442 and 115 turned into 116 in 312. So this was a while ago. You can tell I stopped using this in spring 19. I don't even know if there is 312 stuff. I feel like I didn't actually do, this is just get your learn on. Yeah, I didn't actually build. So I was building the skeleton for it, but I never actually got to it because I stopped using this project. I stopped using this to host my course websites when 312 came along. Yeah, successful branching model. This is 442 stuff as a placeholder, and I just never updated it. So I don't think I even used it spring 19. So pretty old project for what it's worth. But it was a fun project. I liked using this. I've switched these days to my more simplified course websites where it's just one page, you scroll down, you see all the information. This had menus and drop-downs, and the big reason why I switched off of this was there was a menu at the top with drop-downs and then the same menu items on the sidebar. So you have two places to look to find anything. Either one you look at, you'll find all of the information. And I would constantly get students saying, oh, I didn't know how to find the homework handout. Because I just thought they would use the menus, and they don't. Like, not everybody does that. And it baffled me for a long time. But now I'm like, no, I put everything on one page. There's no navigation at all. And that's been working a lot better. Nobody asks me where to find things anymore. I shouldn't say never, but and nobody sometimes, but it's very rare these days. But it was constant before. And you can see this is before, speaking of constant, before const was a big deal, when I would just use var for everything, because ECMA script 6, I think, introduced const and let. Wasn't really a thing quite yet, or maybe I just wasn't aware of it. But yeah, old code. It's weird looking at old code. I'm not going to change all those. So this is an Express server. So this is JavaScript code running on Node. So if I don't even think I've talked about this much, if at all, this semester. I showed a little bit of JavaScript. But Node is if you want to run JavaScript somewhere outside of a browser. You run it with Node, and that just runs JavaScript code in any environment, like it's a regular language and not just confined to the browser. And it adds a little bit of functionality. Like Node in the browser, you can't read files with Node in the browser. JavaScript in the browser, you can't read files, but with running JavaScript with Node, you can read files. There's extra functionality, extra packages, and everything. So let's go through what this is. First thing, I'm requiring my app. App is where my actual code is going to be, but with an Express app, which uses I got to get my words together here, get this the right way. So an Express script uses, Express is the web framework, and it's pretty much like the web framework if you're using JavaScript and using Node. And Express doesn't really do anything. It does extremely little. So if we look at the code for Express, we can take a little trip down in there. Where the hell's my, I got a bunch more right here. Express. So if we look at Express, I click right here. index.js, express. The actual express library, lib.express, lib express. Here's the main express file. It defines a request. Oh, request has a decent amount. A response object. This is pretty big, it does a bunch. A few other files, but not like a whole lot. This is the whole library, like 10 files, 11 files. That's the entire library. Some pretty big files, but not, here's a pretty small one. But not a lot. Not a lot going on here. What Express does mostly is uses the HTTP library in Node. Node has a really good HTTP library on its own, and that's what's doing the TCP connections. It's parsing requests, sending responses. It's doing like all of the things. And then Express adds one layer on top of that. I'm surprised to see so much code in request and response, so it might be a little bit more than the last time I really dug into this library. Of course, this is an old version anyway, so I can't use that excuse. But it doesn't do a whole lot. What Express does do, and does very well, is adds the idea of middleware. So if you're ever using an Express app, middleware is going to be your friend or your enemy, but it's something you'll have to get familiar with. So before we even get to the middleware part, I'm going to build my app. This is what's actually using Express, is my app. But I also have a www file, which is a common architecture for Express apps. You'll have these two files. And this is what handles the actual server starting. And this is where I'm using the HTTP library. This is part of Node itself to be able to build, to be able to work with an HTTP server. And then I'm going to give that server my app. So when I have HTTP, I'm going to create a server with my app. That app is going to implement the interface that HTTP is expecting. And then HTTP is going to give the request to my app. My app is going to do the Express stuff, but HTTP is doing all of HTTP, all the HTTP stuff. And I'm going to choose a port to listen on. This is mostly boilerplate. I suppose I could explain it if we all want to hear that. I'm going to, and this part is, what am I trying to say here? This is boilerplate that came from examples and demos and stuff. So I'm either getting the environment variable with port. This part's really confusing. I really confused some 442 students with this. The way that Heroku, back when Heroku was free, they were using Heroku, and this is the way their Express deployment worked. You have to set an environment variable for the port number that you're going to listen on. And if that environment variable isn't set, then you'll specify your port number. So I'm saying my port number is going to be 3070 unless I set the environment variable. And then we have this normalized port method, which is going to convert that to an int instead of being a string. So it's a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. I could delete all of this, for example, and just say my port is 3070. And I'd be fine with that. We're going to listen, and then if we get an error, so this is listening for events. Whenever we have the error event, we're going to call our onError, which is going to be our 500 level message. No, it actually just crashes. And then when we're listening, we're going to call this onListening, which is going to print out to the screen listening on port, whatever. So we got a few, just the overhead of actually starting the server and listening for connections. That's what this is doing. And then the good stuff, the juicy stuff, I don't look at the www files, if you can't tell too much. But the really juicy bits are going in our app. This is where our app actually starts, where we're actually writing the code that we care about. And like I was in here before, like I just showed, requiring Express, usually the first thing. If you're writing a server in Node using JavaScript, you don't even have to use Express. You can just go right to the HTTP library, which is a lot more functionality than we had on the homework. You've done harder things than that. If you use JavaScript, I don't think anybody used JavaScript this semester, did they? Correct me if I'm wrong there. But if you were using Node for your homework, you would require net, and that would be your actual TCP connections. If you use HTTP, it gives you tons more functionality than that. So still a lot easier than what you did on the homework. But we can go a step further and grab Express, which does give us that idea of middleware. And then you can see lots of requirements here. I'm grabbing my database. And here are requirements. And by the way, if you haven't gotten in this habit, start doing this. Just do it. Any imports that are from libraries that I'm using should be separated from any imports that are from your code that you're using. So these are all the imports of my code, other files of my code. Then I have the imports of libraries that I'm using. Completely separate, so I don't get them mixed up. Just makes things nice and clean. And then Mongo, if I was rewriting this code today, I'd probably put after all of my imports here. Kind of weird to have initialization code before all of my imports. But apparently I didn't care about that when I first wrote this code. Oh, I'm sorry. I am corrected. Node for, you know all about the net, require net then. I didn't think anyone did. I missed that. So you got an email saying that your MongoDB is exposed. What that's going to be, I closed everything else. I don't have my usual things open. Yeah, it's good DigitalOcean is watching that. Go to your Docker Compose and make sure your Mongo looks like this. If you have ports, and I mentioned this briefly in lecture, but it came and went pretty quick. If you have this line right here, that means your database is exposed to the world, and anyone with an internet connection can get into your database and do whatever they want with it. So when you go to deploy, this is fine for development. When you're in your dev environment and you're testing things, it's fine to do this because then you can use Mongo Compass and mess around with your database. It makes things a little bit easier to develop. But when you go to deploy to the real world, all those security things we talk about really mean a lot because they can actually break your shit. You want to make sure you delete that before you deploy. So that's almost certainly why you're getting that message from DigitalOcean. It's because everyone on the planet can access your database because you have it exposed. It shouldn't, in my opinion, it shouldn't expose your database, but the way Mongo gels with Docker Compose, it does expose your database to the world. So get rid of that line, and you shouldn't see those issues anymore. Oops, I'm in WebStorm. All right, so we have all this stuff, which we'll get to some of it, probably not all of it. Setting up my MongoDB, this we've seen a lot. Most of you probably haven't really seen it much in JavaScript, but that's what it looks like. It doesn't look much different than Python. I'm connecting to my database called Education on localhost 27017. Again, I wasn't using Docker at this time for this project, so localhost instead of whatever I named it in Docker Compose. I'm creating an Express app. This is giving me a base Express app, which is going to handle all of my stuff, all of my web stuff, that I can then add middleware onto. And here's where we get to the idea of middleware, which is a controversial thing. I don't think it's too complicated, but I've ran into people in industry who are like, it's super complicated. So hopefully you'll agree with me after this. Hopefully everything will make sense. But the way an Express app works is when a request comes in, it's going to go through a sequence of functions, and each function is going to take the request and modify at least part of the response or part of the request. It'll do some processing on this request, and then by the time it gets through the last function, the response can be sent back to the end user. Their response can be set. So when we get a request, we're going to use this app.use, which is going to add a piece of middleware. The first thing I'm adding is this library helmet, which does a bunch of security stuff. I never even looked into exactly what it does, but it sets a lot of headers. I believe one of the things is the no sniff right here. One of the things is making sure that all your content type that no sniff is enabled. Content type sniffing is disabled in the browser. Things like that. Just making sure that you have a bunch of standard security headers set in all of your requests. Not the request. You can't control the request, but in all your responses. Flash is some middleware I'm using to send messages to the user. If I say, hey, Flash, send this message to the user, then it knows to send that message to the front end. It'll be part of the response, and then on the front end, there will be a message that pops up. You see those notifications all the time whenever you're on the net. That like at the top of the screen, there'll be a pop-up with an X, like, hey, what's up? And then you click the X and it goes away. That's Flash messaging. I mean, they might be using different libraries, but that's a library that does that. And then I'm going to set up my view engine. This is a big thing I want to talk about today, too. So I'm going to set up my view engine, which is going to determine how my HTML templates are rendered. So I'm going to use handlebars for this. So express handlebars is what they deleted like more than half the letters there to get this crazy thing. But express handlebars is the handlebars library for Express apps. I guess that's self-explanatory. And I have some extra functions. I don't think we have to go that deep into it. But I'm going to specify my default layout and then specify where all my views are as my directory. So I have this views directory. And I'm setting my default view to main. So in my views directory, this is where all of my HTML templates are going to be, and this is all my HTML. Notice I don't even have a single HTML file because I'm creating these handlebars files, which are going to follow that syntax that I showed in class. I stole that syntax from handlebars when I talked about HTML templates. And this is my main template. So every single page that I load from this site is going to use this HTML template. And I'm going to add this, again, this was built for every course that I had at all. So getting the course number and title up in the title of the page. Getting all of my imports. I want these in every single page, so all my imports are going to be in every page. I was using Bootstrap for this. I guess I still use Bootstrap. Getting the icon in the browser tab to be the same across all these. Getting some scripts, highlight.js I believe that was for syntax highlighting for code. I would have code samples embedded in my content. And adding a nav bar. So this notation is to add a partial. Those of you doing front-end stuff, now that I look at this all again, now that I think about it again, those of you doing front-end development now would probably use React for a lot of these same things and have all this rendered client-side. So if you've explored React at all, some of this should seem pretty familiar, similar ideas. But I'm going to add a nav bar here, which is one of my partials. So I have a nav bar, which is going to have all of my navigation information, again, all templated out. It's going to depend on the course number, and then each course is going to have different sets of things in the nav bar. So if it's a course with assignments, I'm going to render all of my assignments in the nav bar. If it's a course with lectures, I'm going to put all my lectures in the sidebar. If it's a course with extras, if the course has extras, it's going to add those into the sidebar. And then each course, get past node modules, then each course, if it had extras, those would be put in the extras. If it had assignments, those would be all added. And like 442 this semester didn't have any lectures. How did I do that without? Oh no, here's some PowerPoints though. Without lectures in. No, I'm not going to worry about it. And then adding more things using these conditionals. If this Boolean is true, then we're going to put all of this HTML in the content. And here I actually have if you're logged in. So if user doesn't exist, that means they're not logged in, and I want to show the login button. But if they are logged in, I want to show them some information about their profile. So I have some dynamic content based on whether they're logged in or not, dynamic content based on what course they're currently viewing, but all dynamic with one big template. And then I feed in all the information for the course and the user into this template, and then everything's rendered the way I want it to be. Sidebar, very similar idea. So I'm going to have the nav bar, the left sidebar for my two navigation modes, and then it's getting tedious going through these, but all kinds of messages for my flash messages. And then here's the next thing I want to talk about. This triple brace and then body, this is where the actual content for the page is going to go. So no matter what page you load, all of that stuff is going to be rendered. The left sidebar, the nav bar, and all of the stuff in here, which are your flash messages that I'm sending you. And then the actual content. And the content is going to be determined by which actual page you're loading, and it's going to load, a different template for each page that you visit. So my templating engine is handling all of that stuff. I'm going to give my templating engine the template I want to render, all the data I want to render. It's going to smash them together, spit out some HTML, and then send the HTML to the user. So same idea like you did on your homework, but that's what it would look like if you're using a library. You say, we're using this library. You write templates using the syntax for that library, and then we'll see when we get to code that's actually rendering one of those templates what that looks like. But it's just going to be, hey, handlebars, do this for me. So all this sets up my handlebars integration. A lot more middleware. This, when you get a request and the content type is JSON, application JSON, you would have to parse that, get extract the body of the request, parse the JSON, get the values for keys and stuff. With libraries, you throw in some middleware that parses JSON. You throw in some middleware that parses URL encoded data. I don't think I ever used multi-part forms for this app, but if I was, it would just be another line right here. Parse my multi-part forms, and the library is going to do it for me. Parsing my cookies, it's going to go into that cookies header and get those cookies in key value pairs in variables in my request. So this cookie parser, maybe we can dive into one of these, is going to take my request, which every piece of middleware is going to have this signature. It's going to take a request, a response, and a next, where next is a reference to the next piece of middleware. It'll be a function that takes request, response, and next. So each piece of middleware's job is to do whatever it's supposed to do. In this case, it's going to populate the request.cookies variable. And then once it's done with its job, it's going to call next. So this first thing, if something already parsed the cookies, it's going to say, well, I got nothing to do, and I'm just going to go to next. Otherwise, I'm going to parse the cookies. I'm going to go into that header, parse everything, and then call next. And go on to the next middleware. So if I string together all these pieces of middleware, I have this piece of middleware which is going to check if the content type is JSON, and if it is, it's going to parse. Oh, I can't get to meaningful code quickly on that one. Then it's going to parse it. This one's going to check if the content type is URL encoded, and if it is, it's going to parse it and populate some variables. Going to check the cookies, parse those. This one is going to add pass. This is the first one that really does my things. This one is going to serve anything in the public directory. If I get a request for anything that matches a file name in that directory, it's going to host that file name. Or, no, I misspoke there. If the request starts with public, I forget off the top of my head. But if it gets a request for, I always forget, if it's static, well, I can just look at my directories. Public. Static. Well, it has both. So. But if it gets a request that starts with static, I'll choose, then it's going to host whatever's in this directory. Then I'm going to write my first piece of middleware, the first one that I'm writing from scratch. I'm going to give it a piece of middleware. So middleware is just in Express, is just a function that takes a request, a response, and a next. So I'm going to write a function that takes a request, a response, and a next. For what it's worth, this is an anonymous function. And I'm going to take my request and jam a reference to my database inside the request. This way, in every single piece of middleware after this one, I can say request.db and have access to my database. So I don't have to worry about connecting to it, creating a new connection. I don't have to worry about accessing a global-ish variable or a package level variable. I don't have to mess with that. I'm just going to put it in my request itself. Preprocessor, I forget what that does. Auth app, I forget what this does too. That is one of mine though. I mean, obviously it handles auth, but it's weird that I have it set up like this. As a whole separate thing. But I don't need that one to explain my points. These ones, this is the syntax. Inside auth app, I have this syntax, but I have it set up as a separate thing. So it's less useful as an example. But this app.use, I'm going to add more middleware, but here I'm giving it more parameters. I'm not just giving it a piece of middleware. I'm not just giving it that function. Instead, I'm giving it a path and then the function. So what this is saying is any request with a path that starts with this prefix, which doesn't make sense because my index routes would get everything. But anything with this prefix is going to be routed to this router. So if I get a request for /courses, that's going to be sent to this router. And we're going to leave this file soon, so let me finish the rest of this. If none of my routers took the request, took responsibility for it, we're going to send the 404. And if something completely broke, we're going to send the 500. So if the request is for /courses, we're going to go to my courses router, and my courses router is going to specify each individual path that starts with courses. So / this is going to be a request that starts with it's /courses / or with no slash. That's this one. So if I get a request for just /courses, this is my piece of middleware that's going to handle that. And I'm going to render index. So I'm going to render, if I can get back to my templates. I'm going to render index, which is all of the stuff that we saw from main. Main. And the left sidebar, the nav bar, main, all of that stuff is there automatically on every single page. And then where we saw body, This is going to be replaced with this, which is just going to be a list of my courses. If you go to my course website but didn't know what course you were enrolled in to know which link to go to, whatever, just click on whatever one is in this list. So this is a loop. So this link is going to be copied for each course in the course list, and it's going to have the proper URL for that course. The second argument here, where's my routes course, is this res.to template. This is the way I set it up because it made the most sense to me, is my oh my goodness, I thought that long and still got it wrong. My HTML templates are pretty complex. They need a lot of variables. There's a lot of placeholders in those things. And I don't want to mess with that too much every single time I get a request. I don't want to be managing that in a really messy way. So in my res, I created this toTemplate variable, which is created in my preprocessor. I believe it's in util. Preprocessor, it's a piece of middleware I kind of skipped over, but that's going to get a lot of information and populate this toTemplate, of course named because this is all the information that's going to my templates. I'm going to populate this as a big old object with all kinds of information and all kinds of key value pairs, and then send the whole thing to my templates to get them rendered. So I have this big old JSON object and which template I want to render. I send those both to Handlebars, and Handlebars does the whole thing. Handlebars does the actual stuff. So when I want to render one of these, I say, I want the index view, and it's going to know to go to my views directory and find index.handlebars. And here's all of the information that you should use to populate all of the things. And I think this is the last thing I actually want to talk about here, is sometimes you have pathing that is dynamic. If somebody says get request, actually that's not the last thing I want to talk about. So these are for get requests. Hopefully I have a post in here. If I want a post request, I do router.post. So if I get a post request for this, this is the middleware that's going to handle it. If I get a get request for this, that's the router that's going to handle it. And you can use your other HTTP methods as well. So now this is the last thing I want to talk about until we switch to the Tornado project, is if somebody on your homework makes a request for /image/some image name, you have to dynamically grab that image name from the path and then open that specific image file. So with a library, and by the way, I forgot to mention this at the top, but most web frameworks are going to have similar solutions to all these problems. All the problems that you had to solve for your homework, they'll have pretty similar solutions. So the syntax might be different in different languages and different frameworks, but this has to be solved somehow by a web framework, or else I wouldn't even call it a web framework. It's got to handle dynamic. So in Express, it's colon and then some name, and then in colon some name here, and then that variable will be put into your request. Is that how it works? I thought it was a little different. No, I'm thinking of Tornado. It'll be put in a variable, and then you can grab the value for that variable. So you just say, hey, this is a variable. If I get a request for /something/lectures/something, can you please pull out those two somethings and give that information to me? And somewhere in here, the course should be used. Because clearly the lecture is being used. Maybe I use it somewhere else. But anyway, that makes the point. Oh, and here's an example of using Flash. So if I call rec.flash success, so I'm going to render this. You saw my different Flash messages in the template. This is going to be a nice green happy message. and I'm going to say, you enrolled in this course. Go you. And then that's going to add that to the response, which it always seems backwards to me, like I'm adding this to the request because that's the way the library said to do it. But it's actually going to be part of the response and be sent to the end user. So sometimes those things are a little counterintuitive, at least to me. Maybe I'm just missing something. But I'm going to go to the request and send that message. Yeah, it's in the middleware. The order of the middleware is in the order that you add them here. So for example, if I took my database thing, like these routes are going to depend on my database. If I put my database down here and up in one of these routers, I try to do rec.db.collections, add this to my collection. It's not going to work because the database isn't there because this piece of middleware didn't run yet. So the order in this file is critically important. You have to do all of your parsing stuff before you're going to start accessing those values that you expect to be parsed. If I have cookie parser down here and I'm trying to access values and cookies in these routes with these routers, it's not going to quite work for me. And I feel like this should, this code's not broken, but I don't know off the top of my head why everything doesn't get routed to my index router. Okay, let's see if my brain can handle switching gears to another one. All right, so this is a Tornado app. If I can get to the top level here. Not even the right one. There it is, app. So this is a Tornado app. Tornado, if you haven't heard of it, I assume most of you haven't heard of it. But the syntax is pretty similar to Flask. I like Flask's syntax, so I like Tornado's syntax. It's very similar. Very easy to work with, very out of the way. If you've used something like Django, you know Django is right in your face all the time. You're always very aware that you're working on a Django app. We call that an opinionated framework, where Django has opinions on how web apps should be built, and you have to follow those opinions if you're using Django. Tornado and Flask are more out of the way. They're more lightweight. They're more unopinionated, where the library is there to help you. The framework's there to help you out, but you're writing your own software, and the library's just got your back whenever you need it. So very different strategies, or very different approaches to building these frameworks. And for my money, I like Tornado, Flask. I like the micro framework approach. Express as well, where it gets out of your way, but it's there to help you. So Tornado, I say that, but it is actually pretty different. So for this, we're going to have different paths. When I build the application, and the big selling point for Tornado, it's made to solve the 10KC, 10,000 concurrent connections problem, where historically web apps, web servers couldn't handle up to 10,000 concurrent connections because they were inherently multi-threaded. Each connection would have its own thread. Threads are pretty heavy, and they wouldn't be able to get up into the 10K range. Tornado came in and said, no, we're going to have lightweight concurrency without requiring a separate thread for every connection, and then we're going to scale up beyond 10K that way. So that's the reason why I started using it, because it scales up really well. Nginx is the same thing. Apache was the web server. Nginx kind of took over because Nginx was designed to handle this 10KC, 10,000 concurrent problem. Especially when you're using WebSockets. If each user has a WebSocket, their connection is constantly open. You have to be able to handle something like that. Oh, don't get my secret. So for this, we're going to specify our path. And I had this weird bug. I feel like there's a better way to fix this. But I have two paths for every path, if it's a trailing slash or not. kind of embarrassed by that. There's a better way to fix that. But this was easier than relearning regex. So each path is going to go to a separate handler. So whatever request I get, I'm going to send that to a separate handler. And I always forget regex, but I think this means slash and then anything. Anything but not another slash? I don't know. But let's just go into one of these handlers. So let's go to the skill tree handler. So if we're in here, this is like our router method. So if we get a GET request, we're going to run all this code. If we get hopefully this is one with a post. This one doesn't have a post. But if we get a post request, we'll specify that as a separate method. So we'll specify what happens when we get this request for each different method type. I'm going to set a default of 115, but I should get the course ID. Oh, I'm so far deep in this, though. Quest app. But I should get the course ID, skill tree handler. I guess I don't have a path that gives it to me. To get something other than the default. I don't know how I get something other than the default. And then run whatever code you want to be able to handle the request. Of course, whatever we want. Redirects are as easy as just redirecting. And then when I'm done, I'm going to render. So again, I'm using HTML templates here. So I'm going to render a specific template. And I'm going to specify, instead of having that one big two template object that I had in the other one, this one's a little more straightforward. The other one was trying to be flexible with any structure of any course that I wanted and have one app to rule them all. Didn't really work out for me. But I was trying to be super flexible. This one, not as much. So we're going to specify the parameters for the view. And then if we get to our views, view templates, skill tree, and then we're going to see the same idea. We're going to have our syntax in here to be able to render